Brandon tries his friends first, but they don't pick up. He finally calls his parents, Brian and Annette, and asks them to come get him. He tells them he thinks he's near Lind. They get in the car and start driving toward what they believe is his location, keeping him on the phone so he can direct them. Late spring, May 14th, 2008. 19-year-old Brandon Swanson drives home after celebrating the end of the semester. It's late, the roads are quiet, and he's texting and calling friends. He hits a rough patch on a gravel road and ends up stuck in a ditch. He's unhurt, but now the night begins to fold in on itself. For 47 minutes, his parents try to shepherd him home over the phone, guiding, asking, listening. At one point, Brandon says he's by some lights and will walk toward them. Then, just after 2:30 a.m., mid-call, he suddenly says, "Oh shit," and the line goes silent. No sound, no words. Then no return. That silence is the pivot. His parents call back. No answer. They drive to the spot they think they heard, and they search the ditch lines, the gravel roads, the dark fields. Authorities are alerted. At first, law enforcement treats it like a typical late-night missing person, but details begin to multiply, and the case grows stranger by the hour. Cell phone records later show Brandon's last ping came from an area near Taunton, not Lind. This mismatch sends searchers in a different direction. Deputies found a Chevrolet Lumina in a ditch near Taunton, with doors open, keys gone, and no sign of Brandon. The reality: he wasn't where he thought he was. Imagine his parents driving that night, flashing lights, calling his name, trying to make sense of directions from a son who can't pinpoint his own position. Brandon keeps them calm on the line, trying to describe landmarks, farm fields, a gravel road, the faint glow of lights somewhere off in the distance. The human voice is the only thread they have. Search teams mobilize. Volunteers, sheriff's deputies, and the family fan out across county roads, ditches, and riverbanks. K-9 teams track scents. One dog follows a trail toward the Yellow Medicine River, then continues along the far bank and up a gravel road before the scent ends. The lack of a body, however, leaves more questions than closure. There are a dozen small, painful details. Brandon's shoes, his jacket, the fact the car keys are missing, the way the door stood open. Each detail hints at movement, not someone collapsing in their seat. Someone left the vehicle deliberately or under duress. And yet, no witnesses, no CCTV, no further calls, no confirmed sightings. Local media follow the story. The family's fear becomes public grief. Porch lights stay on. Brian and Annette ride out on the roads night after night, searching with flashlights, calling out their son's name. That human image, parents refusing to stop, becomes part of the case's emotional spine. People everywhere feel it. As daylight arrives, more coordinated searches begin. Helicopters sweep from above. Boats scan river corridors. Deputies comb tree lines. Field by field, the community joins, but the landscape is merciless. Marshy banks, dense grass, hidden ravines. Time stretches, and the night's silence turns into a long, grinding wait for any sign. Investigators collect phone records, timestamps, tower pings. They reconstruct the call log and Brandon's last known movements. The mismatch between where Brandon believed he was and where his phone really was becomes a critical mystery. Was he disoriented, misreading landmarks, or was something else at play? The analytical side of the case digs in. Over the following days and months, searches continue seasonally adjusted as planting and harvest cycles allow. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension eventually takes the lead, compiling tips and leads. The FBI's VICAP system lists Brandon as a missing person, keeping the case on national radars for possible links to other violent crimes. Theory generation begins in earnest. Could Brandon have fallen in the river and drowned? Could he have been abducted by a stranger sitting in the darkness? Or did he become involved in a tragic accident off the road, a slip into an unseen ravine? The evidence seems to permit multiple plausible but unprovable outcomes. Let's look at the possibility of accidental drowning. The Yellow Medicine River is cold, fast in places, and treacherous at night. A sudden misstep on slippery bank or wet rock can lead someone into swift water. Dogs sniffed near the river. Scent trails followed streams. But search divers and repeated sweeps never recovered remains. No body, no clothing, nothing definitive. Abduction theory. No car in sight, no witnesses, and no tangible traces of a struggle. Most abductions leave some sign: a displaced bucket, a scuff mark, an object dropped in a hurry. In Brandon's case, the evidence is quiet. Still, investigators can't rule out someone lurking in the dark, waiting beside a road for an unassuming driver. The possibility remains chilling. Another angle. Brandon might have been disoriented, perhaps slightly impaired from drinking earlier, and walked in the wrong direction. Rural roads can loop, farms can be dark, and the mind in the middle of a muggy Minnesota night can misjudge distances. If he walked toward lights he thought were a bar parking lot, those lights may have been distant farmhouses, a false beacon guiding him away instead. Then there are the small human facts investigators study: his shoes' tread pattern, fingerprints in the car, any signs of trauma in the ditch. The physical record is sparse. Missing keys add a worrying note if they were gone. Did Brandon carry them? Did someone take them? Or did he drop them somewhere, along a hidden path between car and road? These questions keep the inquiry alive. Community memory frames the case. People who were teenagers then recall the strange, hushed conversations in diners and gas stations. Rumors sprout like roadside weeds. Sightings in neighboring towns, people who saw a hitchhiker, a dark pickup idling on gravel. Most of these led nowhere, but each rumor persuades some to keep searching. The story becomes woven into local lore. Investigators consider unusual possibilities. 2. A transient killer passing that night, a motorist who struck him and failed to report the incident, or a private party who intercepted him. Each scenario receives a checkbox and a file in the investigators' cabinets. They test tips, run forensic analysis, and re-interview witnesses. Time, however, slowly erodes memory and evidence. Let's slow down and think about those 47 minutes on the phone. For nearly an hour, Brandon guides his parents, tries to describe landmarks, and even promises to walk toward lights. That kind of sustained phone presence suggests he was alert and communicative for a long period. If something catastrophic happened at the end, it happened fast and without opportunity to call back. Because of the prolonged call, some hypothesize a sudden, rapid event, an encounter with a hidden hazard, a fall down into a concealed culvert, or an animal attack. Most rural landscapes have small hidden killers: irrigation ditches, abandoned wells, old culverts. A human silhouette can vanish from sight in a heartbeat once it drops below the edge of a gravel road. Investigators tracked scent trails with canines again and again. Dogs are not infallible, but they can detect patterns humans miss. The trail leading toward the river, then along the opposite bank, is especially puzzling. If Brandon had entered the water, why would the scent continue up the far bank? Some think the dog followed a dropped article. Others hold that the trail points to a more complex movement. There's an emotional toll here that weighs on the narrative: the parents' refusal to give up. The porch light remained lit for years as a symbol of hope. Annette and Brian continued fundraising, hiring private searchers, and pleading publicly for any piece of information. Their persistence kept the file open and kept volunteers returning each spring when harvests allowed field searches. Over time, private investigators and independent researchers applied new techniques: satellite imagery review, meteorological reconstruction of that night, and modern drift models for footwear and clothing in marshy areas. Some pushed theories about how wind and current could move small items, hoping a misplaced shoe might show up years later in a predictable spot. These methods extended the search beyond conventional limits. Law enforcement faced criticism early on for slow coordination. Initial advice to wait was painful to the family. That delay may have cost precious early leads. But officials also had thousands of tips to parse and limited manpower for exhaustive sweeps. The case exposed the friction between community urgency and bureaucratic procedure in a small rural region. Digital forensics added small lights to the darkness. Cell tower pings and phone metadata outlined a rough map of Brandon's last minutes. Each ping is a node, each dropped call a clue. Reconstructing the path from these blips as messy towers cover wide radiuses in rural areas, but the data pushed searchers toward places they might not otherwise have checked. Technology did help, just not enough. Recreational hunters, farmers, and off-duty officers joined periodic searches. One spring, a group found clothing fragments that excited the community, but forensic work later discounted them as unrelated. False positives like this inflame hopes and then crush them. The cycle repeats. A tip lights up the case, volunteers rally, forensic tests return inconclusive, and the slow grief resumes. Some suggest Brandon staged his disappearance. The idea is sensational, but his family rejects it as inconsistent with his character. He had plans, relationships, and a life. He just finished a semester. The evidence leans away from voluntary vanishing. That said, police must entertain this possibility until definitive proof rules it out completely. Let's return to terrain specifics. The area between Porter, Taunton, and Lynn contains a braided network of tributaries, muddy banks, and overgrown culverts. In daylight, they're obvious. At night, they can blur into continuous dark. A single misstep on unstable ground could plunge a person into water and underbrush, making visual detection from road level almost impossible. Years passed. Searches scaled up and down with seasons and available funding. In some years, sophisticated sonar sweeps covered new ground. In others, only volunteer drives kept the case alive. Each renewed search utilized lessons from previous failures, cover earlier missed zones, re-examined footprints, check private landowners' properties more diligently. Persistence was the case's backbone. Public fascination turned Brandon's story into a subject for podcasts, long reads, and documentary segments. Each retelling often adds detail, emphasis, or a new interview. That coverage amplifies the pain for the family, but also brings new tips. Sometimes a passerby hears something in a broadcast and steps forward with a memory that might otherwise have stayed buried. Media exposure is a double-edged sword. There are chilling what-ifs. A motorist hitting Brandon and fleeing, a transient with violent intent, or even a chance encounter gone wrong. Each scenario has been hypothesized by armchair detectives and professionals alike. For every theory, there's a counterpoint, and for every counterpoint, an unanswered question. The net result: the case resists closure. Investigative advances keep hope alive. Improved scenting technology, better remote sensing, and DNA techniques that can sometimes link microscopic reminders to a missing person. If some personal item from that night ever surfaces, modern forensics could provide a breakthrough. Until then, these techniques are a promise and unresolved potential waiting on the horizon. Listen to the human cadence, the pauses, the breathless parents, the dead air after "oh, shit." That silence is the core of the horror. In podcast form, we lean into it. Let the silence sit for a beat. Let listeners imagine the fields, the chill, the faint hum of a distant truck. Horror isn't always visceral. Sometimes it's the sudden absence of everything you expect. Local law enforcement still accepts tips. The case remains active in databases, and an investigator's memories. Volunteers prune brush, concrete beds, and revisit old leads every so often. The community keeps watch, because giving up would be to betray the image of the porch light left burning for a son who might return. That image is both painful and galvanizing. What lessons does Brandon's story teach? First, early, coordinated search response matters. Second, small rural gaps in surveillance and infrastructure can hide tragedies. Third, compassionate, persistent community involvement sustains investigations. And finally, sometimes human uncertainty is not an enemy of progress, but its driver fueling the small, deliberate acts that might one day produce an answer. We may never fully know what happened that night, but the work continues. Tips still arrive, analysts still reconsider maps, and human hearts still hope. Whether Brandon's fate is hidden in a river's mud, buried in a forgotten culvert, or tucked away by someone who never told, the search for truth is both investigative and moral. It's about accountability and the refusal to let a life simply fade away. Brandon Swanson's disappearance remains a quiet, aching mystery. It's a story about roads, darkness, parents who will not stop searching, and a community that refuses to forget. As long as people remember, as long as they keep looking, there's a chance another clue will turn up, and one day this long night might finally yield an answer.